Drone shots of London's Wembley Market buzzing with Indian shops, Toronto's Little India Festival, Dubai's Diwali celebrations, and Nairobi's bustling Indian-owned businesses. For decades, millions of Indians spread across the globe. Some left in search of opportunity. Others were driven out by racism, politics, or nationalist policies. Entire communities were uprooted, and many countries thought they didn't need Indians anymore. But history proved them wrong. From running corner shops to building billion-dollar businesses, Indians became the backbone of economies wherever they settled. And today, those very nations are begging them to return. With over 32 million people, the Indian diaspora is not just one of the largest in the world, it's also one of the most influential, shaping industries, politics, and culture on every continent. From Africa to the Middle East, from Asia to the Caribbean, here are 10 nations that regret kicking Indians out. When the British built the East African railways in the early 20th century, they brought thousands of Indians as workers, clerks, and traders. Over the decades, these Indians didn't just survive, they thrived. By the 1970s, though they made up barely 3% of Uganda's population, they controlled nearly 90% of the country's economy, from small corner shops to major industries. But in 1972, Uganda's dictator Idi Amin saw them as an easy scapegoat. Claiming that Indians were exploiting Africans, he ordered all 80,000 of them out of the country within 90 days. Families were torn apart, businesses seized overnight, and entire communities forced to flee. The short-term result was economic disaster. Shops were shuttered, factories stopped running, and everyday Ugandans suddenly faced shortages of basic goods. Uganda's economy shrank drastically. By the 1990s and 2000s, reality hit hard. Uganda needed the very people it had once rejected. Successive governments quietly invited Indians back, offering citizenship and incentives. And they returned, rebuilding what was lost. Today, once again, Indian entrepreneurs dominate trade and investments in Uganda, proving that driving them away was one of the nation's greatest mistakes. Historical images of railway construction, Indian shopkeepers in Nairobi, followed by protests in 1960s and modern Nairobi skyline. In neighboring Kenya, the story was similar. Indians had been brought in to build the legendary Kenya-Uganda Railway, a project that cost thousands of lives but became the backbone of East African trade. After the railway, many Indians stayed behind, becoming traders, bankers, doctors, and teachers. They formed the middle-class bridge between colonial rulers and the local African population. But when independence came in the 1960s and 70s, resentment brewed. The new Africanization policies painted Indians as outsiders who held too much wealth and power. Anti-Asian sentiment rose, and many Indians, facing hostility, packed their bags and left for Britain or Canada. The fallout was immediate. Kenya lost skilled professionals, doctors, and teachers who had kept its institutions running. Commerce slowed, and gaps appeared in vital sectors of the economy. Today, Kenya looks back with regret. The same diaspora that was pushed away now returns as investors, entrepreneurs, and bridge builders of commerce. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was once invited as a guest of honor, symbolizing just how much Kenya values Indian ties today. Bollywood movies are celebrated, Indian festivals are embraced, and many Kenyans openly admit the Indians were never just outsiders, they were builders of modern Kenya. Dar es Salaam port in the 1960s, followed by footage of shops being nationalized, and today's thriving Indian-owned businesses. Across the border in Tanzania, history took a slightly different shape but ended with the same lesson. When President Julius Nyerere introduced socialist Ujamaa policies in the 1960s, the government nationalized shops, factories, and land, much of it owned by Indian families. Overnight, thousands of Indians lost everything they had built. The short-term impact was devastating. With businesses gone and expertise lost, the Tanzanian economy faltered. Shortages became common, and growth slowed. But when the country opened up in the 1990s, the government realized it needed Indian investors back. Invitations were sent, incentives were offered, and slowly, the Indian diaspora returned. Today, in cities like Dar es Salaam, Indian merchants once again dominate trade, commerce, and retail. Walk through the bustling markets, and you'll see the same surnames: Patel, Shah, Desai, proof that Tanzania has learned a difficult truth: expelling the Indians may have been politically popular once, but economically, it was a self-inflicted wound. When the British brought Indians to Fiji as indentured labourers in the late 1800s, they came to cut sugarcane, build roads, and work in plantations. Over generations, they stayed, and by the 1980s, Indo-Fijians made up nearly half the country's population. They dominated agriculture, education, and commerce, playing a central role in shaping modern Fiji. But their growing numbers created political tension. Native Fijian elites feared losing control of their homeland. In 1987, a military coup toppled a government that had strong Indo-Fijian support. The result was an exodus. Thousands of Indians fled to Australia, New Zealand, the US, and Canada. The consequences were severe. Fiji lost a massive chunk of its skilled workforce almost overnight. Teachers, doctors, and professionals left, while the sugar industry, once the backbone of the economy, went into decline. What was framed as protecting native identity ended up creating a brain drain that Fiji still struggles with today. In recent years, the government has changed its tone. Facing labour shortages and economic stagnation, Fiji has introduced policies to bring Indo-Fijians back, even offering dual citizenship as an incentive. From being marginalised to now being welcome home, the Indo-Fijian community is once again seen as essential to the nation's future. Visuals: colourful shots of Diwali celebrations in Trinidad, sugarcane, plantations in Guyana, and campaign rallies of Indo-Caribbean leaders. Across the Caribbean, a similar story unfolded. In the 19th century, after the abolition of slavery, the British brought Indians to Trinidad and Guyana as indentured workers. They tilled sugarcane fields, worked in cocoa plantations, and slowly built thriving communities. Over time, Indians in the Caribbean became a powerful force in agriculture, trade, and culture. But the 1960s and 70s brought waves of political and cultural marginalization. Indo-Caribbeans were often treated as outsiders, accused of holding onto their culture instead of fully assimilating. Facing discrimination and lack of opportunity, many Indo-Caribbean families emigrated to the US and Canada in search of better futures. The result was predictable. Both Trinidad and Guyana suffered from the loss of educated professionals. Doctors, engineers, and teachers left, leaving gaps in critical sectors. Economies stagnated, and social progress slowed. Today, however, the narrative has shifted. Indo-Caribbeans are celebrated as a backbone of national life. From farming to business, music to politics, their contributions are undeniable. Both Trinidad and Guyana have even had Indian origin prime ministers, proving just how integral the community has become. Governments now actively promote Indian culture. Festivals like Diwali are national holidays, and ties with India are emphasized as sources of pride. What was once dismissed as foreign is now recognized as fundamental. The Indo-Caribbean identity has become inseparable from the Caribbean itself. After World War II, Britain faced a critical labour shortage. To rebuild its shattered economy, it opened its doors to workers from across the Commonwealth, and Indians answered that call in huge numbers. They drove buses, staffed the newly created NHS, and opened shops that kept communities alive. But by the 1960s and 70s, resentment was brewing. Anti-immigrant groups spread fear, racial violence was common, and slogans like "send them back" were painted across walls. Many Indians, tired of hostility, packed their bags and left for friendlier countries like the US and Canada. The consequences were immediate and painful. Britain's NHS struggled without enough doctors and nurses. Public transport faced shortages of staff. The very backbone of the service sector was weakened. Fast forward to today, and the picture could not be more different. Indians are Britain's most successful minority, dominating business, medicine, technology, and even politics. The UK's Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is of Indian descent. Indian origin CEOs run some of Britain's biggest companies. And once again, Indian doctors and nurses form a lifeline of the NHS. Ironically, the same country that once told Indians to go home is now actively courting Indian students, entrepreneurs, and investors. For Britain, the days of regret are a reminder that it should never have taken its Indian community for granted. Construction of Dubai skyline, oil rigs in Saudi Arabia, Indian migrant workers in uniforms, modern-day Diwali celebrations in UAE. In the Gulf states, the story of Indians is one of both hardship and resilience. When oil wealth transformed the Middle East in the 1970s, it was Indian workers, from Kerala nurses to Punjabi engineers to Gujarati traders, who built its roads, skyscrapers, and service industries. But gratitude was often short-lived. Periodic expulsions rocked the community. In the 1990s, Saudi Arabia deported thousands of Indians under Saudization policies. Kuwait introduced strict limits on foreign workers. For many, decades of loyalty ended overnight with a one-way ticket home. The fallout was clear. Projects slowed, businesses faltered, and hospitals ran short of skilled staff. Without Indians, much of the Gulf's machinery ground to a halt. Today, the picture has changed again. GCC states openly court Indian talent. They beg for Indian nurses, IT specialists, and engineers. The UAE celebrates Indian festivals with grandeur, and special visa schemes are designed to attract Indian entrepreneurs. For the Middle East, the lesson is simple. Indian workers weren't just cheap labor. They were, and still are, the lifeblood of their economies. 1930s Rangoon streets bustling with Indian traders, military coup footage, modern Yangon skyline. In Myanmar, formerly Burma, Indians once formed a massive part of the workforce and business elite. They were dock workers, bankers, teachers, and shopkeepers in Rangoon, helping the city thrive as one of Asia's busiest ports. But everything changed in 1962 when a military coup swept across the nation. The regime nationalized businesses, stripped Indians of property, and forced tens of thousands to leave. The fallout was disastrous. Trade collapsed, banking slowed, and Myanmar lost much of its entrepreneurial class. What was once a vibrant commercial hub became economically stagnant. Today, Myanmar has quietly shifted its stance. The government, desperate for foreign investment, is once again inviting Indian businesses into key sectors like energy, oil, and gas. It is a subtle admission of what history already proved. Driving Indians out came at a heavy cost. Tea plantations in the highlands, Tamil workers in the fields, Colombo skyline. In Sri Lanka, Indians were brought in by the British to work on tea plantations. For decades, Tamil workers toiled in the fields, building what became one of the world's most famous tea industries. But by the mid-20th century, politics took a dark turn. Many Indian origin Tamils were stripped of their citizenship, denied basic rights, and caught in waves of ethnic conflict. Entire communities were left stateless, with thousands forced to migrate. The result? A sharp decline in Sri Lanka's tea industry, as experienced plantation workers left. The loss of skilled labor crippled one of the country's biggest exports. Over time, Sri Lanka realized its mistake. Rights were restored to many Tamils, and today Indian investment dominates sectors like telecoms, energy, and banking. From being marginalized to becoming partners in development, Indians have once again become central to Sri Lanka's economic survival. Rubber plantations, Kuala Lumpur during 1969 riots, modern Petronas towers lit up during Diwali. In Malaysia, Indians, mostly Tamils, were brought in by the British to work on rubber plantations. They later moved into education, medicine, and government services. But in 1969, racial riots shook the nation. New economic policies favored the majority Malays, sidelining Indians and limiting their opportunities. Many Indian families, feeling shut out, migrated to countries like Singapore, Australia, and the US. The loss was deeply felt. Malaysia's economy suffered imbalances, and entire sectors lost skilled professionals who had once kept them afloat. Today, the Malaysian government has changed its tune. It actively engages with the Indian diaspora, encouraging entrepreneurs and professionals to return. Indian origin Malaysians are now ministers, judges, doctors, and business leaders. Their presence is not just accepted but celebrated, a recognition that Malaysia's progress is tied to its Indian community. Common theme: everywhere Indians went, they built businesses, schools, hospitals, and industries. When expelled, host nations collapsed economically. Now those same countries invite them back, often with open arms. Indians equals biggest diaspora, 32+ million. Soft power, Bollywood, yoga, cuisine. Economic power, remittances, tech, medicine. Diplomacy, India's global rise makes diaspora more valuable. Summarize: from Uganda to Fiji, from the UK to the Middle East, the story is the same. Kick Indians out, regret it later. Message: Indians have transformed nations, not just economically, but culturally. Closing hook: the question is, in the 21st century, will the world finally learn that driving Indians away is not just cruel, it's self-destructive? Outro: tease next video.